This KFAN podcast is sponsored by Builders and Remodelers, exclusive Twin Cities provider of Elements Windows. Get the highest quality windows at unmatchable value. Visit buildersandremodelers.com for more details.
Get ready to experience the magic of James Taylor live in concert. He's coming to the X next week, Tuesday, June 17th. You can enter for your chance to win a pair of tickets at KFAN.com, keyword contest.
How many years ago did we lament the passing of the final Panakuchen Hoos?
Yeah.
We thought it was the final one, St. Louis Park, correct?
Yeah, maybe 3 or 4 years ago.
It's got to be at least that long, right?
Which means probably 6 or 7 years, because that's how time works.
You never say never in the food business, apparently. That's what we are learning, because Panakuchen Hoos might soon live again.
Is that right?
Ladov's Pizzeria, which is described as the oldest restaurant in Plymouth, Minnesota.
Oh, wow.
Is planning an expansion. And the extra space will allow it to add breakfast to the menu, but not just any breakfast. Here's a quote from Quang Nystrom, owner of the restaurant. It will be a very special kind of breakfast. If you've heard of Panakuchen Hoos, it might be Ladov's Panakuchen instead.
Believe.
So I assume you got to get copyright permission to use the Hoos, right? And the Hoos recipes, if indeed that's what we're talking about here, the Panakuchen Hoos recipes, I assume somebody's got to sign off on that. Whether it's, I don't even know if it was owned by a family, whether it's a corporation, that they're all in on it together. But he was very specific about saying that it would be, our breakfast is basically going to be the return of the Hoos, Panakuchen Hoos. What an emotional moment that might be for Hoos devotees. We have people in our audience who grew up on the Hoos.
For sure. I'm one of them.
There's no question about it.
My dad and I went all the time.
And
he loved the Hoos.
And now it appears. Now, again, I don't know if this is like 50% slam dunk, what it is, but it's, and any story that allows me to say Panakuchen Hoos again is worth devoting this much time on.
It feels good to just hear it again. It feels good to hear it and say it again. I think the distinction would be is you can't have the Hoos, because the Panakuchen is just the Dutch way to make the pancake,
true.
right?
Yes.
So no one owns the Panakuchen except for the Dutch, perhaps.
Correct.
The recipe. But if you start infringing on the Hoos, which of course is Huis, that's where you might run into some legal challenges. But anybody can make a Panakuchen.
So and this is, I guess, kind of underscores how little time has passed in which Plymouth has even existed. Ladov's Pizzeria has been around since 1971.
Yeah.
And yet that's enough to make it apparently the oldest restaurant in Plymouth.
That's why
Plymouth's only been around for like 15 minutes.
That's why there's still room for new housing developments.
That's true.
Not as much, but there's still some.
Nystrom apparently purchased the restaurant in April 2024 from the Ladov family. Okay. And the restaurant is proposing a 1,000 square foot addition for extra cooler and storage space. I've never had their pizza. Have you had it?
Yes, not a lot. Okay. I've had it. I was telling you during the break that a lot of former coworkers and current coworkers meet up at Ladov's quite frequently just for, the ketchup lunches, the Covenant ketchups and things like that. It's very good. And even though it's not that old, it's not like you're going to, some brick oven place in Brooklyn or some Chicago pizza place that's been around since 1912. It's still, 70 still has some pretty good vintage,
that's
right?
true. I mean, now you're talking about, it's 2025.
Years.
Yeah, you're right.
So that does have some, I think, history behind it. So I think it's kind of a classic place. But I have not been there often.
So, I mean, it sounds like they have to the Plymouth City Council has to approve the expansion plan, right? So I don't know what goes into that. Unless there's newer information that they already have, there might now be...
Get it done.
This might be... I mean, this might be a really sly bit of strategy by the new owner to say, if I just propose we're expanding for breakfast, the city council may say, well, we're happy for you, but I don't know if we like the plan that much. But you go to them and say, it's not just breakfast. It's not any breakfast. It's Pannenkoeken Hoos breakfast. At that point, you're going to get raised hands, I think.
You should.
At least from locals who've spent more than 15 minutes here.
What a boon for Plymouth to have, because that's a great breakfast lunch combo if you wanted to just spend a whole day in the area.
Right.
Get your Pannenkoeken, then go hit a bucket of balls, and come back and have some great pizza for lunch. It's a way to keep them both.
Here's a text out of Rochester from Dan. There's a Hollandberry Pannenkoeken in Rochester that is run by the former owner of the Hoos when it was in town.
Is that right?
I'll take his word for it. I have no particular way to do it. Well, Julie from Burnsville offering up a very good State Fair T-shirt idea that combines the fan and Pannenkoeken. The Hoos is loose. The Hoos is loose.
Remember when we started the campaign when Hooters was closing in Block E, which is also now closed? That's where the Timberwolves and Lynx practice now, Mayo Clinic Square. We tried to get Pannenkoeken Hoos in the old Hooters location.
We did.
We wanted honk for the Hoos.
We were not very successful.
Billboards.
But we gave it a college try.
We did. A lot of Hooters are closing too, by the way. Did you see that story?
No. Is that true? Have they outlived their usefulness at this point?
Well, I think it's a different time than maybe when Hooters first originated. But there is an ode to a dead chain restaurant trend going on. Like all these places like Fridays over here.
Yeah.
Kind of just the nice, the sit down restaurant that's not, $400 when you walk in there.
Correct.
Those are fewer and far
you're right.
between, and I feel like there is an ode to a dead trend there.
You might be right.
At some point, because a lot of us grew up on those places, and they're harder to find now.
Hoos is pronounced like house in Dutch. That may be so, but it's not anymore near as much fun to pronounce if we say it.
Not on this show.
Pannenkoeken House.
Yeah.
Come on, man.
No, it's the Hoos.
It's got to be the Hoos.
Honk if you want the Hoos.
Yeah, it all
honk
fits,
for the Hoos.
It all fits together so nicely. We've got a Done as a Society to get to in our next segment. We got a lot of ground to cover between now and Top 5 at 5. Kessler is scheduled to join in studio at 5:30, and I'm going to have a big-time journalism question, a big-time ethics question for Kessler that I don't even think he knows about. Don't forget, 5:30 with Kessler.
Head back to the 50s at the Minnesota Street Rod Association event June 20th through the 22nd at the Minnesota State Fairgrounds. You can enjoy the classic car marketplace, T6 flyover, the Great Race, Cruise and Art Craft Fair, and a ton more. Head over to our contest page for your shot at a pair of tickets, KFAN.com, keyword contests.
This story, but it's got good Done as a Society material. But apparently, TSA is officially banning Costco cards.
Yes.
From being used in lieu of your indecisiveness, your inability to match or get your real ID before the deadline, because one of those online rumors got started that don't worry about the real ID process. It's a bit daunting. It's a bit intimidating, especially if you've got a Costco card. You hand the individual, you get to that place in line in security where they ask for your boarding pass often. And now they're asking for your real ID. What's the deadline? What's the date on the real deadline? It's.
I think it's passed.
Is it passed? Okay, I know
thought
it was June, I think, or was it May? Whatever. I think we're pretty much there. There were people who apparently believed it, and they're saying not gonna work. Costco cards do not count as real IDs. In fact, the TSA, they got a sense of humor.
Yes, that's where I found it.
Via
I had to
X,
check to make sure this was legit a few days ago.
and apparently it is.
Yes.
TSA sent this out on June 4, 10:45 a.m. We love hot dogs and rotisserie chickens as much as the next person, but please stop telling people their Costco card counts as a real ID because it absolutely does not.
Pizza's good too, by the way. Underrated.
It is underrated.
Yeah. We had it
TSA
the other
says
night.
trying to use club cards for ID could actually lead to delays and travel headaches as well. TSA last month began enforcing the requirement for real IDs and other acceptable forms of identification used for security points. Those that are accepted include passports, border crossing, and permanent resident cards. Now, I also learned, I believe this applies if you have a passport card. There's a difference between a passport and a passport card. My passport had expired, so I had to, basically start the whole process again to get it renewed. And I got a great tip from, I think this was actually, I got this done in Carver County, where they said, hey, by the way, you might want to, you got an option on if you don't have your real ID, passport card, which is obviously smaller than having to carry around a passport all the time.
Awful small.
Will also, so small you might lose it. That will also, pass muster when it comes to, rather than the Costco card, when it comes to getting on a commercial, on a domestic flight.
I think I said last week, on Enough Said, maybe, that anything that's online now, I take like 10 seconds before I even think about it or comment on it, just to double check it, because I have no idea what's real anymore, right?
Correct.
With AI, you can do anything. So when this popped up, I did very much verify that it actually came from the TSA actual Twitter handle. But here's my question to you about...
May 7 was the date.
Yeah.
By the way. Yeah.
About the real ID hysteria, because I heard the morning show talking about this the other day, too, that some of them need to get their real ID. They have passports, obviously.
Yes.
But because they go to, any Vikings London trip, they get to go. Or Dublin or wherever. But you have to renew your license every 4 years. Because I double-checked. I said, do I need my real ID? Because I have to go to Big Ten football media days in 50 days or whatever it is.
Correct.
And I go, I'm pretty sure I have my real ID, but everyone's talking like I've never gotten it. You get your license renewed every 4 years. And you have the option at that point, years ago, to say, I want to do real ID.
Right.
So I don't understand why this has snuck up on so many people or why so many people are panicking when you could have just done it. You knew it was coming eventually.
True.
What was the holdup or the drawback why people didn't do it then? Because that's just
I'll
what I
give you
did.
the answer. I think to a certain extent it's because people get intimidated with the added paperwork that is different than just renewing your ID, your driver's license, and they decide I'm just going to put it off, or I get intimidated by it.
Yeah.
Because you're right, that would have been the orderly way to do it. But I think there's several things you have to have, I think, including a bill. You got to bring in a bill. You got to bring in utility bills.
Yeah.
Several things that you have to bring in as part of that process, and sometimes people aren't ready for it. Did you see how the rumor got started? The food blog Chowhound claimed in the initial version of an article titled "How Your Costco Card Could Save You at the Airport" that people's Costco cards could pass through TSA because it is considered a photo ID. The article cited that impeccable source, Reddit, where users claimed their warehouse club cards helped them through airport security when they forgot or lost their regular ID. After TSA debunked the rumor on social media, Chowhound issued an update to the article saying, a previous version of this article stated TSA is likely to accept a Costco membership card in lieu of a valid form of ID. TSA does not explicitly state you can use a Costco card as a form of identification. Now, that sounds like a half pelt at best. Maybe even like
that's not
quarter
good.
pelt.
Not a good look from Chowhound.
No, they don't explicitly state you, because that almost seems to infer that there is still a chance that you can you can get through it and they're not going to laugh at you or put you to the back of the line. And by the way, what do they do now? If you do not have the real ID and you don't have a passport or passport card or other documents in lieu of, is it literally you're done? You're not going to be able to make your flight? Is that where we are with this? I don't
know for sure, but I have to imagine there's some type of process to verify you are who you say you are in a different way. It's obviously going to take longer. They probably have to bring in a bunch of different people to try to figure it out.
Correct.
Because that stuff happens time to time. We're going to have Lavelle on Friday. We're about to celebrate the year anniversary when he lost his license, his wallet, after going through TSA security. Like, people go on trips and lose their passport, they lose their wallet, they lose their ID. There have to be ways. I'm guessing it's just very time consuming, and there's a lot more hoops that you have to jump through rather than just...
Must be.
Because there has to be a way. They can't just say, well, you don't have your license, you can never leave. That doesn't make a lot of sense.
Well, but I mean, what do they do? I mean, are they going to give you like one, we'll let you through this once?
No, but I'm sure, again, I don't know, but there has to be.
Because sooner or later, you might have like a period where there's a grace period, but at some point it's got to be, well, that's the rule, and you just have to deal with it. So I don't know. Maybe we'll get some I'm sure some transportation people who will let us know. Should the State Fair T-shirt read Pfannkuchen?
Oh,
Pfannkuchen. Even better, melding
right in there.
The
I
fan
like that.
and Pfannkuchen Hoos, even better. Bring back Fuddruckers, to your point about, are there any Fuddruckers? I was never a big Fuddruckers guy.
I loved Fuddruckers. Yes.
Is that the one where you kind of made up the burger as you went along in line?
It was great. They'd give you the burger.
Yeah.
Now it's one of Ryan Donaldson's favorite places, the one we always went to on France, Smack Shack. Now it's a very posh and Tony Smack Shack, my childhood Fuddruckers. And you could get, I like a cheeseburger, as you know, but I would always get the hamburger, and then I would just use the cheese sauce that they provided as opposed to getting the cheeseburger. It was so good.
The cheese sauce was good?
Oh,
was it really?
So good.
Was it like the liquid cheese?
Yeah, it was like nacho cheese.
Oh.
It was tremendous.
But, I mean, don't you like your cheeseburger where it's all kind of been grilled together?
At most places, yes.
Okay.
Convention grill, for sure. At Fuddruckers, though, it was part of the charm of it, I think.
You think so?
Yes. Fuddruckers was great. The fries at Fuddruckers?
Maybe I didn't give Fuddruckers enough of a chance.
I'm not surprised.
And maybe that's why, they were not able to stay around quite as long.
Fuddruckers was great. Great family place.
Two quick texts to get to. I find it curious that so many so-called NBA experts are telling star players like Joker and Ant and Halliburton, you just need to be more aggressive. What's wrong with you? When these same experts have proclaimed the OKC defense is the best there's ever been, they say Jordan never had to be told to be aggressive, but if you've defined OKC as the best defense ever, that also means Jordan never faced a defense like theirs. Well, I would quibble with that, but I get his point. And it is an important point that if Halliburton hasn't been the scorer, some of it is they're doing some stuff.
Yes.
Now, that doesn't mean that he can't try to come up with, or his coach, the very inventive Rick Carlisle, can't try to come up with something to loosen things up for him a little bit. Jordan faced some pretty damn good defenses, just starting with the Detroit Pistons.
Yeah.
Teams. What was their nickname?
The Bad Boys.
The Bad Boys.
At a time when you could go Edmonton Oilers third period on guys.
Yes.
In the NBA.
Correct.
Right? You could just beat the hell out of them if you wanted to and knock them to the ground.
I think a majority of us who watch NBA would love to see more of Scott Van Pelt. This is a callback to Mitch Lawrence's point that others have made, that part of what hurts the NBA playoffs on ESPN is that they don't go to a panel show after the game. They go to Scott Van Pelt. Van Pelt's excellent. I don't think there's very many better hosts.
I agree.
In sports broadcasting, but he's a host. So if there's a limitation, it's just a limitation of the role he's in, which is going to be more gatekeeper, right? He's kind of you could say he's Ernie Johnson.
Right.
People want more than Ernie Johnson after a game where they're going, how did that happen? How could why didn't Halliburton take more shots?
Right.
Is the series over? Whatever. So they're looking for right away, not just the anchor, they're looking for largely ex-players the panel to sort of, face off against one another about exactly what everybody just saw.
And the reason they don't do the post-game show, and now they're going to for a lot of it with ESPN, it's a little ratings trick where they immediately sign off and throw it to SportsCenter. So then it's technically SportsCenter. Right. So you can send out the press release that says SportsCenter ratings after Game 3 of the finals up 4,000%. That's a good point. Yeah. When Van Pelt's just a lot of times kicking it right back to the broadcast crew or one of the analysts that's on site there. It's just a semantical game. But, yeah, Van Pelt is great. He's tremendous.
Yeah, there's no arguing with him at all. It's just that he is what he is. And he would say the same thing. He's not necessarily viewed as an analyst. Did you see the text that came in earlier? This might have been for you as much as for me because you're the producer of the show. This is why we had Mitch on.
Okay. And
I can't find it because many have come in since, and I didn't star it. But it was basically the effect of, I dare you to put on a national NHL media big shot the way you routinely do with Mitch Lawrence. And the comeback, if I could find the text, I would go with, well, there'd be two. One of them more professional than the other. The professional one would be, I view Russo as local and national.
Yeah, and he's covering the series.
Yeah. And the snarkier one would be, we'll take your sport more seriously when the sport takes itself a little bit more seriously than it did in the third period of its most recent game. And even Louis eventually said with us, old school as hell, said, what was that all about? But we have people who texted us and said that Edmonton did exactly what it needed to do, that basically from this point on in the series, the Florida Panthers are going to be too scared to win two more games and win another cup.
Yeah.
A team that, how many cups have they got now? 4, 5, 6? Well, they've been in the finals.
A lot.
Is it 3 straight years? Yeah. Whatever it is. And they're winning routinely this year. They're winning games by 3, 4, and 5 goals. But they're going to be terrified because the game got broken down on a series of cheap shots because the losing team in this case was losing so badly, they said, let's just go assassin on the bit. That's not a sport that really deep down wants to be more than a niche sport, that wants to be taken seriously as far as I'm concerned. It just doesn't.
So should we try to have Russo on tomorrow? Probably should, right? They play again tomorrow, I believe.
Timing's perfect.
Yeah, I'll text him.
Let's come back and chat with Brian Oake. My sources say he was on with Common earlier today. We're going to bring him back to really talk about the same thing I assume he was talking about on the noon to 3 show. The news that another musical heavyweight, the second of the week, has died. Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys. Oake on that and who knows what else next.
And now it's time for Ode to a Dead Guy.
Are pouring in. Brian Wilson has died at the age of 82 years old. I'm going to read you a couple sentences from the obit, the testimonial in The Guardian before we say hello to our next guest, Brian Oake. As the leading creative force in the Beach Boys, Wilson crafted a variously carefree and melancholy sound that came to define the uncertain utopianism of mid-century California, using ambitious studio techniques to give the band's music a thrilling grandeur. His songs about surfing, driving, girls, and the pep of youth modulated to more reflective and often psychedelic material, resulting in one of the most highly regarded catalogs of American song. Brian Oake you didn't write that. But I thought
who wrote that? Because that was perfect.
Wasn't that nice? The name is
really well put.
Ben Beaumont Thomas. I don't know much about him. I assume you would agree with much or all of that, correct?
Every single word, and it was put better than I could ever hope to put those words together that succinctly or that accurately. Yeah, Brian Wilson literally changed the game. American popular music does not take the same pathway, and it certainly does not sound like what it sounds today without the undying and seismic impact that Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys had on American music.
So, I dare say that over the decades, maybe even more so then than now, there are a lot of casual music listeners who say, what's the big deal? It's beach music. What am I missing in this thing? So obviously there was a lot more there than that. To someone who was skeptical or saying, I don't get it. Okay, Pet Sounds. Yeah, there was some experimentation going on. We're happy for you. But what makes this as sophisticated as music aficionados suggest?
Well, even early on, it doesn't sound that sophisticated, but it was. It's kind of like the Beatles in that regard. You listen to I Want to Hold Your Hand, but then you get someone who's a good musician sitting down trying to figure it out on guitar, and there's a lot happening there. But also, there were so many sort of teen bands and fun bands and California sound bands at the time, but the Beach Boys rose to the top immediately because, much like that intro you read, they encapsulated what was great about that better than almost anybody, not only capturing a moment in time, but literally changing the game while they did it. And they had just fun songs like I Get Around and Surfin' USA, that were genre defining at the time. They were the premier American, as it said, surf band, car band, girl band, teen fun band. And I don't think they ever lost that enthusiasm for the quality of the song, even when Brian Wilson, so clearly far, far ahead of his peers, decided it was time to take it to the next level and get experimental. And then, the accolades would pour in, and so he'd feel like he'd have to outdo himself again. And I don't think he ever had any shame about the early output, but I think he, like many great artists, wanted to see what he was capable of doing. And for many people, Pet Sounds is sort of the pinnacle of American popular music, certainly as it applies to any sort of Baroque or chamber pop, but also just how complex it would be, but still hauntingly beautiful to the untrained ear. And
was it McCartney? I thought for the Beatles it was, oh my God, we got it. Pet Sounds. We got to come up with something now. Was that the sequence? It was a bit of a battle that, an informal, but nevertheless kind of intense battle that started to ensue, correct?
Yeah, exactly. You can draw a direct line from Pet Sounds to Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Not that the Beatles weren't already transforming radically on their own, going through Rubber Soul and Revolver. But then you hear a majestic pop masterpiece like Pet Sounds. So then it leads to Sgt. Pepper. And Brian Wilson, obviously dealt with some pretty heavy mental issues, growing up a very commandeering and abusive father. Obviously, though, kind of a quiet, sensitive genius, propelled to great heights. But that sort of pressure, because the Beatles, everybody worshipped the Beatles. Again, without the historical context, a lot of this doesn't seem like it's that big a deal. The Beatles were easily the biggest force, not just in music, but culturally around the world, certainly in the Western world at that time. And to have them, and probably the most respected songwriter from that collective, saying that he just heard the best record he's ever heard in Pet Sounds, that kind of pressure and those kinds of things really they kind of crushed Wilson in a way, it wasn't like he wasn't gifted anymore, but he, as this all became bigger than him, he sort of receded from the spotlight and then ultimately receded from the band. And then, drugs and isolation are never a good combo, and particularly so in his case. By the way, his story is really well documented. That movie, Love and Mercy, absolutely worth checking out. And there are numerous documentaries. If you're someone who is younger and you're like, Beach Boys, didn't they do Kokomo with John Stamos? Shut up. The adults are talking right now, okay? Yeah. Because that is not cool. That is not the Beach Boys. And so I guess I can't give a quick or succinct answer as to why someone who is sort of on the fence or doesn't really get what all the hubbub is about. It has to be taken culturally. They're one of the few American bands that not only survived the British invasion, again, without context, without knowing exactly what the world was like then, that maybe doesn't seem like a big deal, but most of American music was swept to the side through this unbelievable onslaught of the British invasion, and the Beach Boys not only maintained their popularity, but increased it and continued to be chart toppers even once bands like the Beatles were on the scene.
From the same story I quoted from earlier out of The Guardian, Wilson began using cannabis and LSD and said the latter was creatively useful. He wrote a signature Beach Boys song, California Girls, while on his first trip. Said acid allowed him to, quote, come to grips with what you are, what you can do and can't do, end quote. But, he writes, his drug use coupled with his intense workload likely exacerbated mental health problems that had started when he was a teenager, suffering from anxiety. As you well know, he ends up spending lots of time in psychiatric hospitals during the late 60s and would eventually be diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder and mild manic depression.
Well, and unfortunately, he also, I can't remember the doctor's name, but anybody who's familiar with the story knows that there was this sort of Svengali-like doctor that sort of entered his sphere and was controlling what he ate and the meds he was taking and when he worked and who had access to him. And that's obviously not going to help somebody who's having paranoid breakdowns and is still indulging in drugs. The LSD thing, I mean, let's be honest, how many times was that story told in the 60s where, yes, it led to some brilliant creative breakthroughs and allowed people to explore parts of their minds and parts of their abilities they never had before. But as with all things in life, as I said earlier today when I was on with Common, all things in moderation. You know, if it becomes a lifestyle, then you're just, you know, you're backing over your brain with the truck over and over and over again, and it stops providing those benefits and just becomes this weird, hollow, quiet place that no one else can relate to, because anybody who's done acid knows that you're kind of in your own headspace, even with if you're with other people.
What do you know about the relationships within the band? Obviously, this was the guy. I think everybody else in the band knew it, but was it, were there issues there? What did it get, you know, kind of tense as it often does with talented musicians? What do we know about, you know, the interpersonal relations within the band over the years?
Yeah, there are certainly people who know a lot more about this story than I do, but as, you know, early on, I don't think it was a huge deal, but as Brian Wilson receded into the background and, you know, became less of a force within the band, then you've got, you know, his two brothers are in there, but neither of them seem to really be making power plays. It was really Mike Love, because those three brothers, that was their cousin, and he sort of became, you know, the face of it. And I know that later on there were multiple lawsuits regarding the use of the name the Beach Boys, song rights and royalties, that sort of thing. But I think most of that, at least my understanding is, most of that grew to its ugliest after Brian Wilson had really checked out of the public eye. But earlier than that, I'm sure there are people who know the story far better than I as far as where some of that might have started. But, you know, that kind of mega success, how many times has that story been told? That kind of mega success is going to lead to divisions and jealousy and people wanting to grab the reins. So I don't think at any point was it ever in doubt that Brian Wilson was the creative genius at the heart and soul of that band. But yeah, later on, Mike Love took over, and Kokomo. That's all I'm going to say is Kokomo.
Yes. I got an interesting question earlier today from my good friend Rick Bozich, who often has been on the show over the years. He's the only reason I'm in Minnesota, because he had a sports column job and left it after 3 days, apparently traumatized by an experience with Sid Hartman. And then I was the replacement. And he texted this question earlier. Bigger deal, Sly Stone or Brian Wilson? And I think when he says bigger deal, he's talking about the musical, not just accomplishment, but legacy, influence, etc. I don't know that there's a wrong answer here, but I think it's an interesting one because it's been quite a week between Sylvester Stewart and Brian Wilson.
I will say that it's apples and oranges, and I will put them both on the same shelf. I will put them both in a pedigree that without either of them, as I said earlier about Wilson, without either of them, American music does not follow the pathways it followed, and it does not sound like it does today. In the case of Sly Stone, I mean, he did something at the time, and again, cultural context is so crucial, especially at such a volatile time as the late 60s and early 70s, to have a really proper respect and understanding of the situation and just what these guys did. Sly Stone, Sly and the Family Stone was the first major American band to not only be racially integrated, but also to have have men and women in the forefront of the band. That hadn't been done before, and at no time did the music suffer for it. And this is another band that, again, George Clinton, this is a perfect example. George Clinton, Parliament Funkadelic, people often regard them as the high water mark of American funk. He has gone on record many times saying there was never a greater funk band in America than Sly and the Family Stone. And that's the kind of, respect and love that people had for that band. Sly changed the game, man. He put music, he obviously was standing on the shoulders of giants, just like many have stood on his shoulders since that time, up to and including our very own Prince Rogers Nelson. Prince has got there's some Little Richard in there. Sure, there's some Hendrix in there. There's some smoother and, funkier soul in there. But he's, between flamboyancy and impact and restless innovation, he's a lot like Sly. And Sly changed everything. He set the template. Questlove has some great stuff to say about him, from the Roots and probably the premier hip-hop and soul historian of our era right now, that he laid down the blueprint that would define 70s funk. It certainly was part of the blueprint for what would ultimately become disco, one of the biggest forces of music in the world, but also set the blueprint for what it meant to go from a good time party band that was basically sharing the love of the San Francisco utopian dream, because that's where they were from, to, because they had to, becoming a much more socially conscious and frankly even a little confrontational in their content, but never losing sight of the fact that people are here to dance, people are here to party. We can get a good message in there, but we're going to maintain the strength of what we do. So I would say that Sly is every bit as innovative as Brian Wilson was, obviously doing very different types of music. But I would say that his legacy might, in terms of its profound social impact and especially its musical impact, might even be greater than Brian Wilson's. But like you said, I don't really think there's a wrong answer to that question. I just think that if we really sit down and break it all the way apart for the next 4 hours, Sly has had a further reach than Brian Wilson.
Yeah, I think that, and that's not that different from what ultimately I asked Rick the question he asked me, and he said Sly burned bright and then crashed quickly. Beach Boys win on longevity, but Sly's influence stronger in current culture of funk, rhythm, and blues and rap. And I think there's some truth really to all of that. But they are on the same shelf. You're exactly right, because they both were so creative and so inventive. It went beyond the music they did, but the number of people who openly admitted they either borrowed or stole from what they did during their careers.
Yeah, they're both indisputable American music titans, American popular music titans, to be sure, and not only in terms of chart success, but in terms of long-ranging influence. I mean, you can still smell the breath of both those guys and their bands on all the music you hear today. Again, I don't think American pop or American funk sounds anything like it does today without that influence. And if people want to go deeper, because, a lot of people know the Beach Boys pretty white, right? People who don't go deep on funk and R&B, and I'll admit my knowledge there is extremely limited with the exception of certain superstars like Sly. If you want to dig deeper, I cannot recommend enough. Questlove is, by the way, everything that guy touches is gold. His Summer of Soul movie that came out a few years ago, that talked about basically the Woodstock that happened in Harlem over the course of one summer, brilliant. But he also just did a Sly Stone documentary called Sly Lives,
correct,
parenthetically, aka the burden of black genius, that really dives into the story and talks about, this guy did burn out his brain and his sanity on cocaine and PCP, but he was such a freakishly complex individual, like most artists of that caliber are. He offers incredible insight and tells the story with great reverence, even when things get a little bloody and nasty. It's really, really a good starting point for people who would like to know more about that. Also, Sly put out a memoir, I think, just last year or the year before, and the Stone family has confirmed, amidst all this news, that already before this went down, there was a biopic in the works. So we'll get one of those at some point. Hopefully, it's done with the same sort of level of love and accuracy as some of the great ones that have come out in recent years.
When the Sly story broke, we did get Jimmy Jam the same day. He was terrific, and we talked again about because he's very tight with Questlove In fact, just had done a kind of a, I guess you could say, not a media deal, but a sit down with the producers of the Sly documentary. In fact, I think it was just on Jimmy's birthday late last week in an auditorium. Right. And we talked heavily about the documentary is I think it's the first one that got someplace. There's been a bunch, but this to me was the first one that got well beyond the surface. And it was unsparing. You know, they didn't leave out a lot of the dysfunction. And that's the last thing I want to get to with you. So, the cliche is that, and we're talking about musical geniuses like these two, that it almost feels like they're obligated to be damaged. That's all interwoven in that thing. That there's these fundamental cracks in these individuals that's directly connected to their genius. Do you buy that?
Yeah, well, I think it's a bit of a chicken and an egg thing. These are clearly both visionaries. They're clearly, and I think that term musical genius gets thrown around way too easy, but it's absolutely appropriate in both of these cases. I think that, to be that person, you have to be unlike other people around you. You're obviously an out-of-the-box type thinker. You're creative. You're sensitive. You do things that are in you. So there is a certain level of that happening in the head all the time, which I think puts you in a precarious situation, even just regular mental health, even if the rest of your life is normal-wise. But then, in both their cases, you pour a lot of really mind and health-altering chemicals on top of that. Yeah. And I think that when something is that delicate and that intricate, that when it shatters, it breaks more spectacularly, right? And so you get these absolute flameouts or these problematic individuals, and you pour more drugs on that. Everyone knows Sly's story. He himself admitted that PCP and cocaine were his undoing. You can't be at your top when you're doing that kind of stuff, no matter who you are. But then you take, a person whose brain is literally bursting with genius and do that to it, and rarely is the outcome a positive one. Frankly, I'm shocked either of those dudes made it to 82.
Yeah, you're right. Lastly, you mentioned Questlove. I'm looking at, to me, what's the best quote I've seen from you. There's obviously testimonials from everybody right now. Ronnie Wood, Mick Fleetwood, the list goes on and on and on. Sean Lennon, etc. Questlove wrote this: "If there was a human being who made art out of inexpressible sadness, damn, it was Brian Wilson." That's pretty good.
It's great, man. I mean, again, for people who are just like sort of casual Beach Boys fans or don't really, other than the hits, don't know Sly and the Family Stone, the reason that there's so much attention around the passing of these dudes, they change things, man. They literally change things. And even great artists today, how many of them are going to leave a lasting footprint that's anywhere near what either of those two did? And there was obviously a little damage in there and some emotional difficulty, but also a brilliance and a means to articulate it. I think there are probably lots of geniuses out there that simply lack the motivation to grind their way through whatever is the adversity there is, but then also lack the ability to articulate it in ways that resonate with untold millions of people. Yeah, that's a beautiful, and literally everything Questlove does is worth pursuing.
It's true.
I don't know if he has a podcast or not. Listen to him, read everything he writes. This guy is so tapped in and takes it so seriously and cares so much about these legacies. He's great.
Yeah, outstanding. He's been very successful, and he's obviously made some money, and he's using it, I think, in a way that is going to put him eventually in a place that's pretty unprecedented, as you say, as a guy who's trying to help people appreciate history. In this case, musical history. He's done an outstanding job. You're right. As have you. I appreciate your willingness to do double duty today. As
long as Common doesn't get mad. I hate it when the girls fight.
Well, I do too, and I mentioned that to Guardsy because that's the last thing I want to do. We have used you from time to time. In fact, I didn't know. I made the mistake. I checked Brandon's Twitter because I thought, well, if they used you again today, which seemed natural potentially, that he would have tweeted out that you're coming on. I didn't see a tweet. So, well, maybe for whatever reason he decided not to use him today or you weren't available, whatever. So, I'm fully cognizant of all of that and trying my best to to fully acknowledge the
but
fact
again,
that,
I think it speaks to the magnitude of the two people that we're eulogizing today. That, I don't think anybody can take that personally. But no, I'm on with Common every Wednesday at 1:30, and we talk about whatever. It just, unfortunately, because I usually come in to talk about the greats who have passed,
right.
I've picked up the nickname the Angel of Death, and had some important double duty today. We get 22 minutes to talk about it, and frankly, we could take up a segment far, far longer on either one of those guys. So trying to do it with two, almost impossible. So no, I'm glad to be back. Can I plug my podcast where you kick me to the curb?
Of course. Go right ahead.
Excellent. All right. Well, I host a show called The Brian Oake Show. It is pretty hyper-local in terms of its focus. It's about 95% music-related, music-adjacent, musicians. We have some other entrepreneurs and whatnot on occasionally, but just past episode 485,
nice.
So we're zeroing in on the 500th episode very soon, and it is available widely. In fact, as we talk, on the free iHeartRadio app, which I understand is the number one destination for today's podcasting.
I want to, from the bottom of my heart, very sincerely thank you for the invite.
Yeah. What invite?
Well, from you to be on your podcast.
Almost 500 episodes. No Dan Barrero.
Again, I'm not.
Like you would ever come to my humble little studio on Chicago Avenue in South Minneapolis and hang out and do a show.
For a Pannekuchen Hoos gift certificate, I'd do it in a minute. That's all it would take.
I'll see what I can wrangle. But now you stirred the nest, my good man. So I'm going to be on you, and you're going to be on the show. We'll figure it out. We usually record in the morning, so you got plenty of time before. You're not golfing every day like Common.
No, I'm not.
You got plenty of time. We've got a lovely little studio down in South Minneapolis, nice. And I'd love to have you on.
Be careful what I wish for, is what you're telling me, basically. Correct?
Yeah. No, I know you think you're being funny, and because it's what you do, but just, now suddenly you're going to have me hounding. You'll be like, why did I ever open my mouth?
You have my number. Thanks again, and be well. We'll talk soon. Thanks, man.
All right. You guys both take care, and rest in peace, Sly and Brian.
100%. Thanks, man. Brian Oake. We've referred to him in the times we've had him on over the years as our music big knocker as well. He is on with Common, of course, every week doing, I think, a bit called Rock Talk as well. Let's do this. Let's prepare. Kessler is going to join in studio beginning about 5:30. I'm guessing there's going to be plenty to discuss with him. There's even a couple things he doesn't even know about that I want to get into with Special K, or Puff Puff Kessler, as some are now calling him. We're going to probably, because I went long with Oake, because it's hard not to go long with Oake. We love having Oake on for all the reasons that should be obvious. A kind of a truncated top five. What will it include?
Twins, Kevin Durant, and how long until Richard Pitino, not even Rick, will have to turn down the Knicks job?